Welcome to the SmartZone Network Controller demonstration series for SmartZoneOS 5. In this series, we'll be covering the new features available in SmartZoneOS 5. In this particular demonstration, I'll be covering the AP Switchover feature. This feature allows administrators to move an access point from one cluster to another by providing the new controller's IP address or fully qualified domain name, or FQDN. When an AP moves, it will be added to the destination cluster staging zone, just like any newly added AP. So let's get started. So for this demonstration, I have two different clusters. Each cluster has only one controller. Each of those controllers is a Virtual Smart Zone Essentials Edition. Now this feature we're talking about is available both in the Virtual Smart Zone as Essentials Edition or High Scale, and in any appliances that are capable of running SmartZoneOS 5. So first let's log into my active controller in an active cluster. I have two access points that are already associated with this cluster and with this Virtual Smart Zone. So this is the one I'm going to be moving an access point from to the new cluster I've created, the new Virtual Smart Zone I have. So let's go ahead and log in here real quick. So while this loads, the first thing I want to draw your attention to down here is in the system info section. We're running version 5.0.0.0.675. This is the initial GA release, the first release of SmartZoneOS 5, and this is publicly available to you to go out and purchase and run through and use the feature we're describing here. So up on the top over here, I also want to draw your attention to the host name of this virtual smart zone. Because I'm going to be bouncing between a couple of different smart zones, I want to draw your attention to which one I'm in so that you can identify which one it is when we get there. This one's host name is VSZE 5000675, matching the version number that we have here on the system. And as I go to the other one, I'll show you that one there. And I'll also include some pop-ups that'll just identify to you when I'm switching between one virtual appliance and the other. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have in this system here right now. We're going to go to access points. And once we click on that, the system will populate with the access points I have on this switch that are already associated with this controller. I have an R510 and an R500. Each of these are in different zones. I just want to call out that this move feature really doesn't matter what zone a particular access point is a member of right now. You can still move it to a new cluster, and again, when you move it to a new cluster, it's going to move to that cluster as if it's a brand new AP connecting that cluster. So it'll go into the default zone by default, but whatever staging zone you have on that particular controller is the one it's going to join into. So let's take a look at how we do this. It's actually a pretty simple process. We're going to move over here and we're going to highlight one of these access points. I'm going to pick the R500 access point I have here. Once that's selected and all of the menus pop up and populate with information for this R500, this More box and of course all the other buttons above it open up, but we have a Switch Over Cluster option down here. This is the option we're going to click, and when we click this, it's going to give us a pop-up box that asks us where we want to send this particular AP. What is the IP address, or what is the fully qualified domain name of the cluster that we want to send this AP over to? Now, before we put in that information, let's go ahead and take a look over at my other cluster real quick so I can show you what I have over there. It's not much to show, but I just want to make you aware of what we have set up over on that particular cluster at the moment. So we got to log into it first. And as this comes up, I'm going to call your attention again to this one. It is running version 5.0.0.0.675. This is the same release as the other. Again, GA release of the SmartZone Network Controller running SmartZoneOS 5. And again, draw your attention to the host name up here. It's SZ50-alternate-cluster. So this is my SmartZone 50 alternate cluster. Just try to name it something that makes it pretty clear when we switch over to it that this is our alternate that we're moving things over to from our existing cluster. So let's take a look over here at access points. You can also see it in the health there that I have no access points connected here, but there are no access points configured here whatsoever. So before we move this over to the other controller, let's go ahead and take a look at some information, because again, we needed to have some information to be able to move this cluster over to, or move those APs from the existing cluster to the new cluster. And what we needed for those is we need either the IP address or the fully qualified domain name. For So for my simple lab network, we're going to be stuck with using actual IP addresses for this because I don't have a full domain service set up to be able to do the fully qualified domain name examples for you. But that's okay. The functionality is still the same. So I'm going to go over here and take a look at the cluster. And when I get there, I'm going to see that I have a controller here. Its IP address for management and access point access is 192.168.1.22. So this is the address we're going to use when we come over there and set up the switchover for the access point to the new controller. So let's go ahead and hop over there. So we're back over here, again, looking at my VSZE 500675. This is not the alternate cluster. This is the originating cluster. And we'll go ahead and type in the IP address of the new controller. And that was 192.168.1.22. When we click OK here, we get a pop-up box. It says, do you want to trigger the switchover to that IP address that we just entered, and it gives us a bright red warning that says these APs will be removed from this cluster. So it actually deletes the AP from the cluster. So we'll click yes. And while this is going through the process, I'm just going to share a couple things about this functionality with you. So this feature only works if the APs are running firmware version 5.0 or above. So you can see in this screen right here we're looking at that the firmware for this particular access point that we're moving over is 5.0.0.0.753. It has to be a 5.0 release. If it's below the 5.0 release of firmware on the access point itself, a warning message will come up and the operation will be rejected and it'll stay here right where it is. Now, the AP will switch over to the new SmartZone Network Controller IP address within 1 minute, so it's not absolutely immediate. It could take up to a minute. Again, I noted that the original AP record will be deleted from this controller once we confirm that and move it. So let's go ahead and do a refresh on our screen right here. And we see that that particular access point, the R500, is now completely deleted from this controller and from this cluster. Now, if an AP move is unsuccessful, which means if it doesn't land on the target cluster within 10 minutes, the AP will reassociate back to this cluster, but when it does, it's going to go into the staging zone. So if this operation fails and it tries to reach out and connect to the remote controller and cluster, and that operation fails, which has a timer of 10 minutes, it will rejoin back to this cluster in the staging zone, and in this case, the default zone. So let's go ahead and take a look at our other controller and take a look at what we see over there. So here we are back over here. It's still looking at the system information. We're going to get out of that and come over to access points. And we see now we have an R500 access point. This is the same one we had originally on the other controller. It's in the default zone. I could configure new zones. I could move this access point to those zones. And I have full functionality with this access point that has successfully been switched over from one cluster and controller, the one controller in that cluster, to another cluster just by selecting that and giving an IP address of the new cluster controller we wanted to connect to. So this is the new access point switchover feature that's available in SmartZoneOS 5. This demonstration is part of a series of demonstrations highlighting the new features that are available in SmartZoneOS 5. Hopefully the information in this demonstration was helpful to you and it'll bring you back to view more of our demonstrations in the future. Thank you.